Thank you for joining the Missing Half podcast, where we're discovering what's missing in private equity and AI. Today, I'm joined by a very special guest, Ed Marsh. He's the founder of Ed Marsh Consulting and has been in industrial businesses since 1992, with international experience across Germany, Brazil, India, and Nigeria. He's a John Hopkins graduate, a former grunt, NACD and PDA director certified, and the creator of the ORE and quality of sales frameworks. In this conversation, we'll talk about private equity's growth blind spot, how sales math can expose weaknesses in the investment thesis, and why AI amplifies strong teams but does not fix weak ones. Ed, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Bill. I love the topics that you tackle, the people that you have, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, and first of all, I just want to start. This is close to our nation's 250th birthday, and I just want to thank you, uh, just completely heartfelt for your service and the sacrifices you made in serving our country.
That's kind of you. Thank you. And I'll note all three of my sons served as well, and my dad and my grandfather. So it's a bit of a family tradition, which is kind of unusual in the Northeast.
Yes, no doubt. Yeah, my grandfather served in the Pacific in World War II, and so yeah, we share some of those items in our heritage and legacy. So, well, Ed, let's jump right into it. Let's talk about your background because it's not traditional, I would say, to end up where you are. Which what does that mean anymore? I don't know. Traditional, but maybe just talk about like how you started in that university experience to the military and now into consulting with some pretty heavy hitting private equity firms on how to move forward.
Yeah. So I won't ramble. But kind of backing up, one of the things that always fascinated me as a kid was architecture, because architecture sat at the intersection of kind of hard science, linear, left hemisphere kind of stuff, and design and art and vision and right hemisphere kind of stuff. So I was going to be an architect, decided I was going to be an engineer instead, went to school, didn't enjoy it, knew that I was going to go into the army running raids and ambushes. And so I did that and then decided to get out of the army to be around for my family and wanted to learn business. At the time, it wasn't as clear as it is today that there's kind of this path through an MBA for many junior officers getting out. So I figured I'd learn how to sell. And to the consternation of some of my family, that's what I undertook to do and did quite well at it. And eventually kind of fell into the industrial space, became partners with a German company in the U.S. operation, got worried about the value of the currency, went to India and set up a company in India to take used machines from the US to India, did a lot of different things along the way, and eventually got tired of kind of running a business with employees and dealing with all that stuff. And so I set up my consulting business, which originally was helping US manufacturers export. Then we discovered that, well, if we're going to do better in international marketing, we actually have to start doing some domestic marketing. And then if we're going to market and generate a ton of leads and nobody's selling them, we have to do something about the sales team. And that kind of then brought me to this integrated model built on the manufacturing efficiency concepts of OEE. I call ORE, overall revenue effectiveness. So that's kind of how I ended up where I am today.
So, Ed, I love this perspective you're bringing to the market. And I've also been an operator and owned businesses. I had a business with 400 employees in a prior lifetime. So I understand, as you do, the operator's mindset that it's not just about getting an approval in a boardroom. You actually have to go do it,
Right.
execute it, evaluate it, see it through all of those steps. And I believe and have seen the most effective consultancies are run by people who actually have experience. And I think that's even truer today because now you can go to ChatGPT and it can make you sound like you know what you're talking about. But to have actually walked through that process, how valuable is your operations experience now as you carry that forward in your consultancy?
I would say, I'm biased, obviously, but I agree with your premise. I think it is valuable, but I'd also argue that if you talk about strategy, it's hard for a strategy consultant to really stick around for the flash to bang to see if there's actually a material outcome that is, clearly attributable to the consulting work. The interesting thing about marketing and sales, even with a relatively long sales cycle, call it 6 to 12 month sales cycle, you can tell in somewhere 6, 12, 18 months whether it's making a material difference. And so that means not only is there kind of traditional operator experience, but I would say it's contemporary operating experience. It's not just kind of this theoretical slide deck kind of stuff, but it's doing it today. And I do the same things in my business. So there's a very real and kind of practical tie in there.
No, I love that. Let's switch gears a little bit here and get right down into PE. I mean, private equity is known for its models, its playbooks, its frameworks. I mean, there's the Wharton School. There's hundreds of years of textbooks, of schools, of spreadsheet models around the PE operating and investment playbook.
Right.
Yet, when we go and look at organic growth, and actually improving the exit value of a investment, there is so little. Maybe talk about what you're seeing and why there's a tremendous gap in a organic growth playbook for private equity.
Yeah, I think it's remarkable the dissonance that exists between the way they visualize and execute on four different levers of growth. And Zorian Rotenberg, who's active on LinkedIn, he's a sponsor, I think mostly in the tech space out of Boston, but he's got a lot of great info on LinkedIn. He highlights this. So basically, if you got four levers, you've got financial improvement, and that's second nature for them. You've got operational efficiency, and that's second nature for them. I mean, how many Six Sigma, whatever black belts do you have wandering around that can fix that stuff? The inorganic growth piece is second nature. They run through the valuation models. As long as the strategy for the platform is solid, the inorganic growth piece is pretty easy. The organic growth piece, however, is the one that if you look at most of those bridge slides or the waterfall slides, that's responsible for a substantial amount of the value creation to drive the IRR. So in other words, within a certain time frame, that's just somehow left to chance. And, there's a little bit of quality of earnings research that's done during diligence, but most of that's a kind of a backward-looking snapshot. Do they have contracts? Is there deals in the pipeline? Can we pick a deal or two and ask some questions about it? It's not really understanding whether the sales team can execute on the investment thesis going forward, which is fundamentally the organic growth piece of that value creation is fundamentally about the ability to win net new logos and maintain and grow margin. And those are fundamentally two areas that most industrial sales teams are very weak at, and most industrial marketing teams. So across that entire GTM function. So I think the key then is to simply sensitize sponsors to the fact that it would be beneficial to them to bring the same kind of rigor that they apply to the other three levers to the organic growth lever. But then that means they need the models, the tool books, the spreadsheets, all the other tools that they successfully apply in the other places to apply around organic growth so that they can run the same kind of a playbook on it.
When you look at the current state of private equity pursuing organic growth, it feels to me like it's kind of the old school way of they pick a path, they pick a thesis, and then they hire a person and then they charge up that hill. And unfortunately, for probably 18 to 24 months, which in a hold period is forever, right? But is the problem in the formation of multiple tests, the lack of imagination to develop those tests and be disciplined to test them? Where are they falling apart in that initial, whether it's the due diligence phase or the testing phase? Where is it really all falling apart?
So I think that, and this will be controversial, but I think fundamentally there's a contempt for sales as a function. And that contempt for sales, I think, bleeds over into, and to marketing to a large degree, it bleeds over into the kind of the unstated, deeply embedded belief that any knuckle dragger can do this. And, in contrast to the sophisticated financial modeling, anybody can go out and knock on doors and vomit up information about our products and services. I think fundamentally, I would disagree a little bit. You said they pick a path. I'm not sure they do. I think
Okay.
often what happens is they've got some warm bodies, they've got a lot of product and service information, and they expect that if they just go out and blab about that, ad nauseum to as many people as possible, that somehow it's going to grow. And I think that fundamental disconnect, expecting that somehow it just happens automatically by virtue of flapping our gums, is, I think, where the breakdown occurs.
Interesting. So it's almost like they treat it like alchemy.
Yeah,
And
exactly. Instead of the opportunity to create alpha, I think you're right. They treat it like alchemy, and you see it on the marketing side. I'm sure you see it all the time, where you've got some companies that started a blog 10 years ago. Their website pages talk about the fact that they were founded in 1927. They got 63,000 square feet. They got 4 of these CNC machines. The blog is like a newsletter talking about a new hire, and it comes out once every 18 to 24 months, depending on when somebody feels like it. And they think somehow a little bit of fabricated SEO and a couple new blog posts is going to drive demand generation and awareness success for them. It's just not going to.
when we think about and that gives me a total new perspective, and I love that because the missing half is trying to get different perspective and see what's missing in the market. And I do think you've unearthed a couple things. One, the contempt for salespeople and marketing people is 100% real. There's no two ways about it. I was on a call with a Portco CEO a couple months ago, and he spent half an hour complaining how much he was paying his salespeople. He didn't like the commission structure. My dad, the way he set up his businesses, he loved writing commission checks because he knew that they were driving revenue, he was making money, and he wanted every one of them to make as much money as possible because he knew he was making money.
But maybe they were both right. Maybe your dad and that Porco CEO were both right. Maybe your dad was paying people who are delivering successful growth, and maybe the Porco CEO is paying people according to a model that just rewards showing up and collecting more orders from the same companies without getting new logos, without increasing margin, without any of the fundamentally important stuff to grow the organic revenue.
True. And that's probably one of the things. So when I think back to the conversation with the Portco CEO, there was a component of I think there were probably two components to the complaint. One was the compensation structure was not completely aligned with driving value.
Right.
The other half was based on the presupposition of contempt for salespeople, right? So you have a little bit of both
Right.
there, but no. So that's interesting. When you think about this disconnect with an organic growth strategy and real competency, moving it from alchemy to alpha, right? I think we've come up with something here. Where do you see that disconnect starting? Is it in due diligence? Is it post close? Where in the life cycle, if we assume, we start and we want to have a 5 to 7 year exit, et cetera, where do you see the disconnect start? Where does it like really grow and accelerate and become a problem? How
Well,
does that
if I'm correct in what I've said up to this point, then I would say the problem starts on mindset long before diligence, because diligence isn't even looking at the right things necessarily. Certainly, once diligence is passed, and just because, I mean, I would point out that an acquisition target, if you run proper, what I call quality of sales diligence on the GTM um, um, motion, you may find that there's significant gaps, and that doesn't mean it's not a good acquisition. It might fit perfectly from a strategic perspective. What it means, though, is first of all, you go in knowing, and it may impact your valuation model. And second of all, you've got a very clear roadmap for what needs to happen during integration so that you actually get traction quickly as opposed to just kind of sit back and hope that it works.
No, I love that. That's a great perspective. And if we can shift that mindset, do you think that mindset is changing currently, or are we still way early in an adoption curve for private equity? We keep hearing all these articles and all these people talk about, private equity's in trouble. There's a huge glut. It's stagnant. We need to clear it out. Do you think the current crisis, whatever that means in private equity, is going to drive more awareness and adoption, or do you see the same old playing out for the next several years?
So I think it's absolutely creating awareness, but the awareness that I see created is around, often they'll hire a VP of sales who goes for 2 years and doesn't deliver. They'll say, okay, it must be that person. They'll hire another VP of sales using the same criteria, industry experience, whatever, goes another 2 years, still doesn't deliver. So now we're 4 years into our, let's say, 7 year runway. Now the pucker factor is really starting to go up. And at that point, awareness increases. Wait a minute. Einstein said something about doing the same thing again and again. Probably we better think about doing it differently. They don't necessarily have the toolkit to reach for the right lever. And of course, that's, I think, a large part of the value that I can create for them. The unlock will come, I think, when they back up and realize they can, during diligence, anticipate exactly what's going to happen and therefore proactively address it so they don't lose 2 years and the IRR isn't jeopardized.
When you think about the turnover that occurs in Portco CEOs, usually at that 3 or 4 year range, whenever they have the board meeting, when organic growth isn't happening, we're not hitting our EBITDA targets, and like the arrows are just not pointing the right direction. Is this not the ultimate hedge? Like when I think about the bets that are made with PE money, and they hedge on all with all of these other things, is not ensuring that you have organic growth, new logos, and margin expansion the ultimate hedge for that Portco CEO to see that deal through to execution and get their payout right at the end of it? But it's the one that people spend the least amount on.
Yes, I completely agree. On the other hand, I don't have the savvy or expertise to sit down and negotiate revised covenants with a commercial banker. And so, I mean, to say that it's only GTM, I think is probably unrealistic. However, I think it's probably the biggest opportunity that's unrealized.
And if I would rather go into that board meeting at 36 months with positive organic growth is the narrative, right? Like if you're going to pick your story,
Right.
this is the story we want to be in. And certainly there's that's not the only thing. But if you don't have growth and the arrows aren't pointing the right way, a lot of the other things you're just not going to be around as that Portco CEO to talk about and sort out. Somebody else is going to clean up that mess.
Yeah, I think that's true. And of course, it's not just the fact that the revenue arrows are not going the right way, but it's that they've sat through 36 months of your board presentation showing pipeline reports that indicate that the turnaround is just literally 1 month away and everything's going to be milk and honey after that. And that goes back to the fact that there's such a fundamental lack of awareness of what sales methodology is, how complex sales happen, what's going on with large buying teams, understanding growing risk aversion, understanding the complexity of a matrix buying team, all that kind of stuff that requires extraordinary business savvy, strong consultative sales, good understanding of business finance, and a number of other attributes among the sales team that often are missing.
So we've talked about this from a theoretical construct and kind of like from a top down. Maybe let's flip the script a little bit and think about a practical guide or some practical advice that we could give someone in the first 100 days or during due diligence. So like, okay, theoretical, big picture, macroeconomic. Let's drill down to, okay, here's more of a to-do list, more of a deploy people towards these items. And if you had some guidance of practical steps, what would those possibly be for those private equity operators to execute?
I would say just like every other function of the business, it has to start with an audit. You have to create a baseline. You have to understand where your strengths and weaknesses are before you can hypothesize about a plan to put in place that might begin to address those. And so I believe very strongly in whether we call it diligence or an audit or a quality of sales, whatever term we want to apply. I want to understand in granular detail everything about the sales function and everything about the marketing function. And then I want to compare those to what I know is working and what represents, for instance, in terms of sales talent, I often talk about the fact that our expectation ought to be second standard deviation talent. And I believe very strongly that we can empirically identify who those people are. I want to understand from a marketing perspective what's happening in terms of the sort of pre-awareness engagement that's so much more important in a zero trust, zero click environment that we live in now. And some of that stuff is difficult to quantify. But if all you're doing is looking at some, call it a vanity metric like website traffic, you just don't get an understanding of what's going on from a marketing perspective. So I think we have to dig in. We have to get that. Once we get that, then we can prioritize and understand, there's change management, there's acculturation, there's limits to budgets, there's changing priorities. There's a lot of stuff going on in that environment. So we can't come in and just wave our magic wand and change everything. We have to be very clear about priorities. Typically, I would argue that there's a couple things that we can do in parallel. The first is probably related to talent and training and clarifying sales process, adopting a sales methodology, establishing clear expectations for accountability and opportunity qualification. And over on the marketing side, I would say we really need to have a plan for how we are going to reach buyers who don't click on information, who aren't using Google searches the way they used to, who aren't falling any longer into this trap of, content, form, download, lead nurturing. How are we reaching those people substantively and consistently in order to create awareness so that as our sales team goes out to create projects, they're able to do so?
Well, and in today's marketing world, there are such opportunities with
Enormous.
AI, with AEO, GEO, with ABM. I mean, one of the things, and we're probably not going to get into it today, but I really believe AI is bringing us to a point where enterprise level ABM is available to the mid market, to startups, and to private equity. And they just need to pull the lever. And we're not talking about, $10 million marketing spend. We're talking, if you have 25, 35, $45,000 a month, a full ABM program where you're going to become the authority and own your market and at least have mind share in a large market share of the buyers who are available. It is there, but you have to be aggressive and you have to pull the right levers. You can't go and spend $1 million on a rebrand and a fresh coat of paint and think all of a sudden it's going to change. So, Ed, I
Yeah,
completely agree with that.
and it can't be just more AI generated emails yammering on about your features and benefits.
Yes. Yeah. AI slop is not the answer.
Right.
The AI that I'm talking about is much more ingrained in the processes, in the identification, in the specificity, in those type of things. And one of the things we're finding that's working well is direct mail. Sometimes you need some type of pattern disruptor, like a
Sure.
podcast, more video, direct mail. Events are booming. Keynotes, sponsorships, those are coming back, or we're going back to the future on those. So it's the right mix depending on the market, depending on your ICP. So there's just a lot. We'll have a whole other episode about that at some point in time, Ed, and talk about that. But
Yeah, and
uh,
maybe we'll take a detour in that episode into Reddit. Reddit to me is
yes.
fascinating because everyone I talk to denies they use it, and yet the market statistic shows that the vast majority of the market across generations, particularly rising generations in industrial engineering kinds of roles, are consistently using it. So somehow there's a disconnect there that we have to overcome, but I believe it's likely for many companies a place that they ought to be thinking about.
Reddit to me is like the fast food of online. At one point in time or another, we all backslide and have fast food from our youth, right? It's not good for us. It's not healthy. We feel terrible afterward, but it's nostalgic. Reddit feels, and then we would never admit in public that we eat a McDonald's cheeseburger, right? I feel like Reddit is the same thing. It is the McDonald's cheeseburger that everybody uses it, but nobody wants to talk about it. And I don't know why that is either, but that is true.
Yeah,
Like,
I would also argue is probably the most authentic place for review feedback that there is. Nobody's paying you to put a review on there. Nobody's offering you a month of credits. None of that kind of crap that happens with other sorts of sites. The moderation is around community standards. It's not around
yes.
whether they like the message. I think that's why people find it appealing.
Yeah, authentic truth and authority is what that AI is bringing us faster to that moment because we can scan all available sources simultaneously. So, not that we're ever going to find pure truth on the internet or through AI, but we're able to find an average of all information out there more rapidly. And theoretically, like the central limit theorem says, if you sample more than 30, you're going to have an average that approximates the average of the general population. So we should be getting closer to truth.
Truth is
Mathematically.
that's a fascinating philosophical topic, and we won't go too deep, but I recently published a podcast episode on epistemological truth. And
Okay.
basically, the fundamental premise is that I have my truth, a prospect or a client has their truth, and according to the epistemological definition, we could both be right because we both have evidence that we believe justifies our holding that truth. However, there's only one absolute truth, and it could be that neither of us have found it. But when
That's
we
right.
have these conversations about, well, that would work, no, it won't work for companies like ours, it's it's hilarious because often those biased presumptions, and this goes back to the way the sponsor and the operating partner and the Portco CEO all think about marketing and sales. Those biased assumptions are the product of very real experiences that we've had, even
Sure.
if they're not correct.
Oh, absolutely. One of the things I think we have to overcome when so like let's take some responsibility in our industry for the challenges that PE is facing with sales and marketing. A couple challenges we have to overcome. One, really bad sales management. You know, I call them like kind of the Andy Oakley. They go in and they're like, you know, shoot them up. We're going to get it done. Big picture, rah rah ree, and no substance. There's some other sales manager personas that are like so in the detail, never get out, never talk to customers, mathematicians, not sales leaders. So anyway, there's sales problems where they've been burnt before, and then certainly the marketing industry is full of snakes.
Yep.
There's no two ways about it. And because like I was just on LinkedIn today and I was going to click on a post because it said it could solve all my problems with three Claude prompts. If I just comment, you know, solve, they would send me and my life would all be better.
Right.
Of course it's true. And as soon as I'm done with this, I'm going to click on it, Ed, and that'll be that. But, well, let's talk. This maybe is a time when we can talk about AI and kind of shift into that conversation. Um, Whenever you think about this movement into AI and ABM for the mid market, what do you think clients aren't doing very well, and what should they be prioritizing? Maybe we can get a little practical here. What are some things they should be looking for to immediately impact the marketing uh, effort, the GTM process with AI, and should they absolutely avoid?
So I think at a high level, they should be looking for addition to capability. I think to the extent that companies are looking at it, they're looking at it as a way to just kind of do existing things more efficiently and do more of those then more efficiently, instead of how can we step change our effectiveness by using this in a creative and different kind of a way. A good example is, um, do you let AI in your CRM enrich a contact before your discovery meeting? That's using AI to improve efficiency a little bit.
Sure.
Or do you have a Claude skill that you've built or a plugin comprised of multiple skills that does extensive research on the individual, on the likely members of the buying team, on all publicly available information, including press releases and SEC reports and everything else that's come out recently to understand strategic initiatives, and other priorities within the company, and then put that for you in a distilled context around the problems that you solve and how you might want to approach it. That's a very different use of AI. We could say it's the same thing, but one will make that discovery call phenomenally successful, and one is just kind of table stakes. I'll tell you though, I recently asked the CEO of a company I'm helping to review candidates for sales managers of, and I asked, how important is it that this person be fluent in AI? I don't think that's really so important in our business, was the answer I got. So, again, I think it comes back to mindset. I also ask
Sure.
salespeople, as on the occasions when I'm interviewing them on behalf of clients, to tell me specifically how they used AI to prepare for a meeting. And an astounding number tell me they didn't. I'm an old school salesperson. I know how to sell. So there's no replacement for a mindset that says it's not important. Once you get to that point, then I think using it in ways that augment as opposed to just replace is the key.
So two things I want to pull on two threads there. Number one, when we think about AI and its implementation, specifically agentic AI and the automations plus now agentic today, I would completely agree with you. 95% of the conversations I have with CEOs are about how are we going to reduce costs? How are we going to eliminate overhead? How are we going to reduce administrative friction in the business? That's it. That there is very little imagination or curiosity around how do we use this to improve our unique value proposition? How do we create value add that will resonate in our ICP? How do we apply or leverage a partner that can utilize AI in the GTM function. We're having to surface and say, well, have you ever thought of this? And they're like, oh, that's an interesting idea.
I think you
Um,
and I both recently saw an article in Harvard Business Review that talked about exactly that sort of a
yes.
thing. Not just using AI to reduce cost, but using AI to drive growth. And it was specifically, I think, talking about wealth managers, but essentially you could just replace the term wealth manager everywhere it appears in an article with whatever industry you're talking about. And I think it applies.
Yes. So the other thing you pulled on there, and this is something I'm struggling with, and we're trying to wrestle with as an organization as we take AI to the market in one of our business units, is this super user concept. So we're trying to really present well to CEOs because I agree that you need to hire people that are using AI well and who are um, self-learning, implementing those type of things. But it feels to me like we're at a moment where the enterprise needs to actually plant a flag in this, invest money and say, okay, we believe this could be part of the sales motion and the data augmentation process and scale it across the entire organization. Well, if we leave that to the sales manager and the salespeople to implement an agentic AI system across the sales team. I do not want my name tied to that. And no disrespect to sales managers, but they're very good at selling, and those things most likely their core competency is not in agentic system development and distribution across people. Is it time for enterprises to put resources and budget and emphasis on actually investing in these systems as opposed to expecting team members to show up ready to use like captive systems that are on their machines in their environments?
So I'd answer that a couple different ways. And first of all, one of my clients is a company that's using AI to create bespoke software for enterprise manufacturing operations. So I'm seeing it kind of on the factory floor, and I'm
Okay.
seeing it in the GTM functions, and I'm seeing it in how I use it and how friends and family use it. I would argue that the resource that needs to be committed, that's much more important than money, is mindset. In other words, I think the board and the ELT and the mid-level managers all need to believe that this is a substantial opportunity and acknowledge that none of us know exactly how it's going to play out. There isn't a clear path for exactly how to start or what the roadmap looks like, but simply sitting there rubbing our chins and contemplating it is certainly not the appropriate way to go about it. So if there's a substantial resource commitment in terms of management time and attention and enthusiasm and support for experiments and backed up by some modest financial investment, I think that's the way to go. At the same time, there's also, I mean, if we talk about let's talk about CRM. Everyone's CRM data sucks. And so how about fine, keep whatever CRM you've got that people are familiar with, but maybe you overlay on top of it one of the new models like Day AI, for instance, which is essentially becoming an intelligence and context layer, almost like a supercharged CDP, what CDPs promised to be some years ago, that sits over top of the CRM, and you can almost let it run independently. So if we think about inaccurate forecasts, fundamentally coming back to the fact that there's a philosophy we qualify in once and we never try to disqualify. And salespeople have happy years and they don't understand, they ask quantitative questions like, do you have a budget? And they don't ask qualitative questions like, what projects are stack ranked ahead of this and competing for the same money in order to really be able to qualify deals. If we accept that premise, then how about if we create a skill within an AI first CRM like Day that runs, say, MedPick, a MedPick framework on every opportunity, takes in every email, every recorded conversation, every interaction of any sort, and begins to fill that matrix and test our hypothesis about the degree of qualification. And then if we take it a step further, and if we use an empirically accurate tool like salespeople evaluations and assessments that I help companies use to understand strengths and weaknesses at the individual level, then we can take the deeper insight about that person, interpolate that into that AI analysis of the opportunity qualification. And now we end up with great coaching opportunities, and a substantially more accurate forecast. And all of that can be done without the salesperson ever even having to do anything with it. It can basically be done in the background at an operational layer if you've got some sort of a revenue ops function.
Yeah. So I think when we talk about resource commitment, we can look at a new model with AI, and we can, in a week or two, come up with a use case, another week or two, put that pilot project in process with an MVP, and then we can start testing rapidly. And we're not talking about the 2, 4, 6 year commitments of an ERP or an IT project. And the thing that I love about this space is we're seeing actual returns, cash on cash, of 3 to 7x investment in a year. So these are not like, oh, if you invest this now in 3 years, it starts to turn like it's now. And the impact is felt, and it is significant. We just need people to start saying yes to the process more aggressively. And it's scary. None of us know. I just do what the AI tells me, and I think it's good. But we'll have that battle at some point in time. But
But how many CEOs do you talk to when you say, well, have you asked Claude? Who's Claude? I mean, if that's the nature of the familiarity in the C-suite, then it's a hard battle.
yes, the awareness where we're seeing dramatic awareness and acute awareness is in AI search, like AEO, GEO. That is a topic that is universally, I would say, understood because they know they're using Claude or Chat or Gemini to research specific things. And now they're concerned as to their effectiveness in showing up for searches related to purchases of their products or services. So that
Right.
space in AI is widely accepted. The recent
But how many have backed up and thought, let me say it differently. I think many think of the way they used to use Google. I'm looking for XYZ. And they now think people are using LLMs the same way. And they're not backing up and thinking about the question the people are asking the LLM. I think I may have this problem. Ask me some questions to help me properly diagnose it. And once we get to a diagnosis, then recommend some possible solutions. And once we've agreed on a solution, then suggest some possible vendors. So it's a very different kind of a search engagement, and that requires very different kind of content.
yes,
All sorts of different things. And I don't think that most have taken that step yet.
correct. We're still seeing focus on what we would call top of funnel attraction keywords, like the industry or the product they manufacture, as opposed to how do I solve this problem? Oh, this could be an answer. Oh, and here's why the features, like walking them through more of like a formal RFQ or
Mhm.
a formal buying process that is touchless, right?
Right.
That's where the shift has to occur, and we're trying to educate the market on that, and a number of others are as well. But it is a different process, and the good news for those who invest a little bit of time, energy, and resources into this, early movers are winning. There's a tremendous opportunity to be first in your market today in this space and really knock it out of the park. So we're trying to encourage our clients to do that.
What's interesting is how many of your clients, if you asked, here's your EBITDA target, here's the gap, how many of these leads do you need to hit that? And ask them to solve for the funnel math for you. How many of them do you think would be able to do that?
20% max, maybe 10. I mean,
Yep.
people don't think, because I had a conversation with a company 2 weeks ago, and they were like, Bill, why are you putting a target of $30 million of pipeline for this product line? We couldn't deliver on 30 million. Because if we have 30 million in pipeline that's really good and really qualified, if we close 20% of that, that's the industry average. That's the real math that's going to come home, possibly, not the 30
But,
million.
but think about what that means. If your sales team is so weak that they can only close 20% of qualified opportunities, how much are you having to spend on marketing to feed that funnel
Yes.
because of that poor conversion rate or those series of poor conversion rates through the sales process? If we go back to thinking about this like we think about all the other functions, or the way we think about OEE and manufacturing, I think it creates a real awareness. And I see people sit back in their seats and take a deep breath when suddenly that dawns on them.
Yeah. Whenever you have that light bulb moment with a board or with a portco operating CEO, and they see the math. I mean, these people are really bright and really good at math and really good at financial models. And as soon as you show them the model, and it usually takes about 15 minutes walking through that, maybe a half hour, and then it's like it's like an epiphany, and they get it, and they realize, oh, marketing can be math. Oh, sales can be math. It's not, Annie Oakley and shoot 'em up. It's very
And when they see that based on the current performance, that for them to ring the bell means each sales rep has to make 17,000 cold calls a year, they say, uh-oh, we probably need to change something.
yeah, we're doomed, right? There's the music in the background is dun dun dun, right? It's not a good moment. Well,
Yep.
Ed, we've talked about like the Portco CEOs a little bit here, but I think one of the things we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about, and you and I talked about this in the pre-show, was we shouldn't let the boards off the hook because they are complicit in not getting focused on GTM and sales. Could you maybe talk about your experience and what you're seeing with the boards and why they need to change their mindset and get on the right program here?
So it's an interesting wrestling match because clearly the board is not there to operate. The board is there to provide governance. However, I would argue that in order to provide governance, you have to be able to ask the right questions and you have to be able to evaluate the answers you're getting. And I wouldn't be able to do that really well as an audit committee chair because that's not in my wheelhouse. And I don't believe that a typical finance or engineering person can do that particularly well in terms of GTM. So I would argue that you need contemporary operational experience on the board, perhaps as an independent director, who can ask the right questions, who looks at the fact that we're consistently talking about a 20% closed won rate, but we've got 60% of deals that end in no decision, who can ask the questions about what is the coaching that's being done to increase our success rate from a discovery call to a qualified opportunity. Those are just like, days receivables outstanding and current ratio and all those kinds of things that are fundamentally second nature for finance people. Those are the kinds of things that are second nature for strong GTM folks. And if the board can only look at the deck slide that shows key deals in the pipeline and some kind of a graph that's up and to the right about, things are going great, even though revenue is flat, then all they'll do is get frustrated. They can't exercise a proper governance. That's really the topic I wrote in Private Company Director a couple of years ago about that you need operator experience to provide governance.
So I completely agree with that. And Ed, I think maybe this is an opportunity for us to take a practical step and maybe walk through, because what you just said is so true. And let's say someone's listening, let's say there's a board member or a Portco CEO, and they're like, okay, this makes sense. This resonates. What are some practical things, or what would a sales governance model look like from 50,000 foot to kind of hopefully create that epiphany moment, that light bulb moment for them? If these were some things they should look at, or some frameworks you would recommend, or your framework that you would walk them through at a very high level to kind of get those wheels turning for them to think about proper sales governance.
So I think we pick a set of KPIs and, not pipeline and not website visits. Goodhart's law tells us that the behavior will respond to the KPIs. So we need to make sure that they're substantive KPIs that will give us a leading sense, but also give us a foundation that we can then work to improve conversion rates on. So if you had to pick two on the sales side, I would say it's new logo first meetings and new qualified opportunities. Because if you look at those two, and we've got strong definitions for what each of those means, then a lot of other things have to be happening correctly in order for those to work. And ultimately, they'll drive revenue. If, on the other hand, we're tracking those and those are not doing well, then it gives us a fairly easy starting point to work backwards and troubleshoot where the root cause is along the way.
I love that. And ultimately, a cure-all for many, many problems is new logos. new
Yeah,
logos, right? I mean, if you wanted to pick one thing, like if you had to pick one, that could really do it. And it's
right.
especially for the sales function. I mean, customer service, you want retention. There's other KPIs for other divisions, but for
Sure.
sales, they need to bring in new logos. I love that. That's a great practical set of steps that someone could look at really quickly and get started. And certainly,
And we wouldn't tolerate a controller that can't close the books until 2 months later. So why do we tolerate a sales team that can't get meetings and new logos? I just don't understand it.
yeah, one of the things I've seen many of these portcos fall into, they have these quote unquote eagles who are responsible for a large book of the business. And all they do is maintain the current clients.
Yep.
And that's where I can agree with the portco CEO complaining about how much that person makes because they're not really a salesperson. They're a customer service representative. They're a relationship manager. And maybe that's a definition and label problem or so that, but new logos are what matter. And we have to drive those through the door.
But there's cascading consequences. They look at the attributes of that person. If they believe that person is their top salesperson, then they look at their attributes and they try to hire people in that image. And so they end up with more people that just want to be friends and do a donut run as opposed to do the hard work of winning new logos.
No, that's so true. One of the things we really try to preach is that whenever we come up with a new GTM motion, we need to test it. And having your number one salesperson who is that quote unquote order taker, who handles a couple of like whales, is probably not the right person. You need hungry, like people who love the phone, people who love to get on the plane, who want to go, who just want to like full attack to test those initiatives for new logos because they will almost always fail just by trying to have that eagle, whatever you want to call them, right? The whale hunter, try them.
I would argue if you have an average person do it, you're going to get a distribution of average results.
Sure.
On the other hand, if you have second standard deviation sales talent and you understand the strengths and weaknesses against 21 sales specific competencies, then you can understand who's going to be able to execute on it. And if it doesn't work for them, you'll understand fairly reliably whether it's the motion or the person. You've got a much better diagnostic.
No, I love that. And I would like to, I would think I would love to really dive into that conversation about those 21 characteristics at some point in time. Cause I'm not as aware of that level of expertise in that space as you certainly are an expert at. But that sounds fascinating to me. I always love the math that comes along with these things. They're not just smoke and mirrors. There's real math. There's real science that we can apply.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that at some point.
Well, Ed,
we could also maybe tackle portfolio operations groups.
Oh,
Beautiful in theory, but I'm not so convinced great in practice.
no, that would be a great topic as well. Well, Ed, we are coming close to our hour here, and I want to make sure that we land this plane with. We are all about shameless plugs. I want you to talk about your consultancy, your ideal clients, what you do for them, where they can find you. It'll also be in all the show notes, all the social posts, etc. But I'd like to give every guest an opportunity to verbalize that and walk through their pitch.
Yeah, so my company is Ed Marsh Consulting. The website is edmarshconsulting.com. I'm active on LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. And I work with middle market sponsors and industrial portfolio companies solely focused on revenue growth and primarily organic revenue growth. Obviously, some governance and strategy leading up to the marketing and sales and success piece. The companies that I enjoy working with are the ones that are committed to change. And that's why often working in the private equity space is more satisfying than working with, some family-owned businesses that think they want to, but just don't have the emotional strength to overcome some of the barriers that exist. I like working with folks that want to get better, who are open to, respectfully delivered insight and criticism and embrace it. And we challenge each other and we work together to achieve a better result across that GTM function.
No, I love that, Ed, and certainly you're accomplishing that. Your advice and insight here today have been invaluable, and I can tell that there is a rich history of performance in the market to arrive at some of these conclusions and perspectives that you only get with scar tissue and time in the field. So we
Right.
appreciate that. Well, Ed, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate the conversation. Looking forward to visiting on your podcast as well in the future and talking about some topics there as well. But thank you so much for joining us today.
This has been great, Bill. Thanks for the opportunity and for the forum and for the good questions.
Thank you for joining the Missing Half podcast. We're discussing what's missing in revenue growth for private equity. Like, share, subscribe. Have a great day.